it's Anthony Chadwick from the Webinar Vet, welcoming you to another episode of VETchat. I'm super pleased to have a very good friend of mine, Liz Barton, on the line. Liz is the head of communications at VetCT, is a fellow, I think I can say, eco warrior or eco activist, can't I? We always have good chats about the environment and our veterinary roles, and obviously VetCT doing a lot of good work in the environmental space. I think I recently saw you've become a B Corp.
Yeah, that's right. We had explored different certifications and ways of really holding ourselves accountable, and particularly looking to continuous improvement across areas of sustainability in the business. And B Corp was the one that we settled on as becoming a business as a force for good, was really why we liked B Corp as a process to go through. And yeah, very proud to have achieved certification and to be here talking to you about that and all things
Yeah.
sustainability today, Anthony. So thanks for having me.
Oh, no, thank you, Liz, for coming on. I think it's interesting because B Corp is obviously much bigger than just that environmental space. We've gone for investors in the environment, which is, clearly just around environment, whereas obviously the B Corp looks at ES and G, doesn't it?
Yeah, so there's 5 areas that are key around B Corp, and across those areas you have to meet certain standards, but it also provides that platform to really understand how you can do better across those areas. So there's 3 that relate to people, so your employees, your workers, the larger society, and then your clients or customers. And then 2 areas, one around environment and then the other around governance. So making sure you're governed in a way that business really is transparent and ethical in the way it operates. And B Corp itself actually stands for Benefit Corporation. And one of the stipulations is that you write into the Articles of Association for the company that it exists not solely in the interest of its shareholders, but it takes into account the interests of other stakeholders, which includes all of the people. But we've also added animals into that mix. So in all of the business and company decisions, we are actually considering our impact on animals, as well as people and the environment. So it's a really nice way of making sure that the business continues to exist as a force for good.
And I know this was sort of partly also a lot of neoliberal economics was just all about it's the shareholders and it's making the maximum profit. And it's been great to see some of the largest company CEOs coming out and saying, it isn't just about shareholder value and profit. It is those other things like, their team, their suppliers, etc. So obviously, it's a very interesting area at the moment. I suppose for those larger CEOs, it's whether they follow up and actually make a difference. But I think with B Corp, because it's being accredited, it's a great way of also measuring yourself and seeing how you're progressing, because no company becomes perfect on day one, or no individual becomes a perfect green individual on day one when they suddenly decide to start on the journey of becoming more sustainable and more environmentally friendly.
Yeah, and I think having a structured way to think about how you continuously improve to benchmark where you are already is super helpful. And B Corp says it's not about creating perfect business. With all of these accreditations and things, there are queries over, well, this company was a B Corp and now it's not a very good company anymore. It's not about saying these businesses are perfect. It's about saying these businesses have made a commitment, and are being transparent in the way they're trying to fulfill that commitment and do better. But no, they're not perfect. I've found just the process of going through the impact assessment of B Corp, fascinating and really helpful. There were things that we hadn't put in place that we could actually, they were quite low hanging fruit, things we could put in place quite quickly, that improved our overall sustainability, and cumulatively over time will have a much greater positive impact. On the business side of things, B Corp have also launched something called the Better Business Act, where if companies don't want to go through the whole B Corp process, because it does take a lot of time and thought and resource, they can just sign up to changing their articles of association to include consideration for other stakeholders. So if any companies are thinking, well, I'd like to do something like this, but maybe B Corp isn't the thing, then that Better Business Act is certainly something to explore as a good first step, for small practices, for example, that want to make sure they continue to exist as that business that's thinking about its wider impact.
It's really interesting. I think there's a tendency sometimes to hear people, slagging off a business that's suddenly it's discovered something's gone wrong, but it's better to do something than nothing. And as you say, no business is perfect. I was looking at the papers. I was in the supermarket yesterday, and there was a paper saying, the schools that are having solar panels put on, the panels may come from slave labor. And I know, I've got solar panels on my roof for the last close to 20 years. And of course, sometimes you just don't know, do you? You kind of think, I am doing a good thing putting solar panels up. And then when you read into it and, where they're coming from and how they're being produced, suddenly you go, but that has to be, you want the perfect situation, but it has to be better to have solar panels than to not have solar panels. Albeit, obviously, once you're aware of it, I think, buy them from Germany or America rather than maybe from some places where human rights is perhaps not as important.
Yeah, and I think having recently completed a diploma in sustainability communications, they actually describe it as a wicked problem, which is a problem that is so complex
Yeah,
and so challenging to even begin to create solutions, let alone solve altogether. There is no such thing as a perfect solution, and even if you do your due diligence today, it might be different tomorrow, because
yeah,
companies are always changing their supply chains, etc. So it's about trying to do what you can and do your best. And we were talking earlier about how it's about sort of going on a journey. What small steps can you make? How can you sort of improve over time? If you make a decision to, a purchasing decision like that, for example, whether it's an electric car, but oh no, then it has a lithium battery, and what's the implications of lithium acquisition, and just trying to make those informed decisions, but understanding that there is no perfect solution. It's just about trying to do the best that we can, and to not be sort of demotivated by the enormity of the problem and the fact that there are no such things as perfect solutions, but just trying to do what we can in the best way that we can, and yeah, not beat ourselves up if,
yeah.
as you say, we then find out further down the line that it's not as perfect a solution as we thought it might be, because it's never going to be in reality.
I think it's living in that area of uncertainty and being okay with that, isn't it?
Yeah, which as human beings we crave permanence and certainty.
Yeah,
So I think across the whole area of our lives, in terms of human sustainability, actually learning to be increasingly agile and living with that uncertainty is a huge, I think it's a life skill we're all going to need increasingly to live and thrive in modern life, because the pace of change is only going to get more and greater. So
yeah. Obviously, um, I have been more and more interested in sustainability. It's kind of been something that has come from very early on in my life, but we're always trying to learn and get better. I did the circular economy certificate with Cambridge University, and I know you've done this diploma in sustainability comms, because comms, how do you make people change their behavior? How do you get people to stop, opening their window and throwing a plastic bottle out because they're finished with it, or their fast food remains onto the floor? It's a really tough area, or, to get them to take solar panels. Maybe give us a little bit of an idea of how that course went and what made you go on it and so on.
yeah, it was really fascinating. And I think, as somebody that works in communications, and I was heading up the sustainability working group and led the project to become a B Corp, actually understanding how we could motivate and encourage people to engage with sustainability even understanding what sustainability is. It's one of those terms that's used and abused and misused and overused. And even so, one of the one of the most interesting things about the course was they said, don't use the word sustainability.
Yeah.
um, actually bring it to life. Talk about reducing waste and talk about conserving water and talk about improving health and welfare. Actually bring it to life and show how it's practical and applicable. Also, less about talking about the facts and figures of how enormous the problem is, because even though it's important to understand that we are facing huge challenges, once you start talking in facts and figures that just sound completely insurmountable, that can be quite demotivating, and also can cause climate anxiety. At the sort of more extreme end, it can actually be really concerning and worrying for people. So it's about, how do you empower people? How do you engage people? How do you make it relevant to them? How do you make it accessible and doable, and sort of breaking that into smaller chunks? And, for something like a big project like B Corp, it's about explaining the why. The why are we doing this and what impact can it have? And to tie up with to what impact can it have, then measuring that impact and showing that impact over time and saying, because we did this, now we've lowered our emissions by that, and the impact that has on the environment is this.
Yeah.
So by empowering people, engaging them, and giving them the data to show that they are actually having results over time, I think were some of the key takeaways for me.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. As I said, have had solar panels, thermal first, and then PVs for quite a long time. And then 2 years ago, I added a battery, and I'm obviously looking at what my kilowatt hours for energy is. And obviously, the battery allows the house to be powered by the solar during the evening when obviously it's gone dark. And I've been able to lower my kilowatt hours by half already, having had solar panels on the roof as well. So it makes a massive difference, but it's also affecting, a cost as well. It's massive savings. So I think more and more now, it's also saying to people, it's the right thing to do, but it also makes economic sense as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you just say to people, everybody should get solar panels, I think sometimes if you think about the wider context, they say, well, why should we do that when, there are all these other countries churning out fossil fuels
Yeah,
left, right, centre, especially in the current geopolitical climate.
yeah,
um, what difference is it going to make if I, use less heating or use more green energy? And actually saying, well, our own individual footprint, what we can do is that's the bit that we can control, right? We can't control what America does with its fueling decisions.
yeah,
And China actually is turning to a lot more green energy,
yeah,
so in the past it was like, well, China's burning a lot of fossil fuels. We can't control that. I really like, there's a model, Stephen Covey's circles of control, influence, and concern. We might be
yeah.
concerned about global climate change, but we can't really do anything about it. If we spend all our time worrying about it and being demotivated, that's not great. What can we influence? Well, maybe we can influence our workplaces. Maybe we can influence our communities. Talking about eco activism, maybe we can influence local planning and local resource use. What can we control? Well, we can control the energy we use in our house. We can control what we do with our recycling and our
We
waste.
can turn lights off, etc., etc.
Yeah, and if enough people live in that circle of control, the things they can control, if we're all controlling what we can and doing the best we can, then that's going to have an enormous global impact. So, yeah, just to try and think about it in that framework, I find really helpful.
I think if we wait, with the whole environmental crisis, there's government is obviously involved, individuals, and then businesses, large and small. And as you said, we can't really do anything about government, and actually, as we see them moving on the whole quite slowly. So it is about ourselves, and then the businesses that we work in to influence and try and get them to become greener. And we know that people want to work for businesses who seem to care about this as well. So that there's a benefit. We talk about sustainability of the profession as well. If you're trying to keep a vet in your practice, is it more likely that you'll keep them in if you show that you seem to care about the environment by having, solar panels on the roof, by watching how you recycle, maybe by having a bee friendly garden at the front of the practice? All of these things I think can help with well-being of staff, and if staff are in a good place, they're more likely. to stay within the profession, aren't they? And within that practice.
We all care about animal health and welfare, which is intimately linked to the environment around and biodiversity, and practices that show that they're doing what they can to support the environment, that's gonna that's gonna sing to the heart of most people working in the veterinary industry, because that's already, we've sort of self-selected as a group to have that as a high area of concern and priority. So absolutely doing what we can as businesses, as employers. As a VetCT, we are largely a remote company around the globe, and actually engaging our global team, to sort of pull together to support biodiversity and wildlife through various projects, can have far-reaching impacts, because we do have people all over the world. So as an employer, taking these things seriously, and showing that we are trying to have that journey of continuous improvement, hopefully is a strong motivator for people to stay and work with us, for sure.
Mhm. I was speaking to two vets over the last few days, talking about our Veterinary Green Awards that are closing at the end of April. So if you're listening to this after April, you missed the vote for this year, but hopefully we'll run them again. This is the fourth year we've run them. And I think it's also interesting that both of those said, "Oh, we're not really doing much for the environment, so therefore we haven't put ourselves forward for it." And I spoke to them, and one of them said, "Well, we're in a council building, we can't put solar on, but actually we're really, really strict on all our recycling, and we're doing some other things as well." And then the other practice said, "Actually, we put a huge, we put a big array of solar up, which is actually powering some of the local businesses close to the practice as well, and we're using green cars, electric cars." And I said, for both of those practices, they're probably in the top 5% in the country doing stuff. So sometimes we can be doing things, but we almost belittle that as well. So I think it's really important to feel comfortable with the level that you're also at. But obviously, as you say, it's a journey. If you do those little things, I was speaking to one of the vets and I said, I know you can't have solar, but maybe you could get renewable energy. Are you, aware of that? Oh, no, that's something to think about. So it's important, for vets and nurses listening, that actually, as you say, even those small things, and obviously, I think both of those practices were doing more than small things, but small things multiplied by many people makes a big difference, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And having that forum to share best practice and to share examples and stories of what people can do. For example, we've rewilded an area of our garden, and understanding how to do that well through, talking to different people and sharing that knowledge. And, maybe for people that don't have gardens, or practices that don't have green spaces outside, how can they actually increase biodiversity, maybe just by having some planters, things like that. I think if you think about the potential of all of the little spaces that could be filled with green that are currently not, again, cumulatively across the country, there could be a huge, footprint of effective green belt that, with natural wildflowers and things that we're not accessing. So maybe it's about just increasing the way we share these stories, and things like the Green Awards are a really good way. Even if people don't, win an award, it's just a really good way of having that information sharing and giving people ideas of what they could do, because there are some really low hanging fruit that we don't necessarily think about, and if we're doing them, they're almost habits, so we're not necessarily acknowledging that that's a really good thing that we're doing. In our office we have a fruit basket, as well as a snack box, and that's actually, I find that personally a great thing, because it gives me a healthy snack option. So for my health and well-being, that's a really important thing. And other people may not even realize the impact that that has on me working here as an individual. So there's some really, really simple things that we can do, but we need to sort of talk about and share ideas so that we all move in a positive direction.
And I think it's also good to showcase people, like Laura Hyam, like Ellie West, like Zoe Al-Fakri, like Helen Gould. People are doing some fantastic work for the environment, over the last couple of years. Linnaeus have kind of dominated the practice awards. They're doing some really good stuff, and I think it's looking towards individuals, but also companies that are making a difference and learning from them. Because I do think within this space, and I'm aware that companies are competitive, but we really should be collaborating in this area, shouldn't we?
Yeah, and we worked with Vets for Pets, Cat Curtis, on the Sustainable Anesthesia program as well, and that's a great way to sort of share knowledge and resource that can impact, a large number of practices.
Yeah,
There are some really fantastic initiatives out there, and if it's coming from top down, it's a huge amount more empowering if we actually have the resource and the support to do it, and we're not having to do it all on ourselves. So yeah, it's as you alluded to earlier, government isn't going to move fast on this, particularly now all the funding has shifted from green to
yeah,
defence.
yeah.
So it's even more important for businesses to do what they can. I appreciate it's not easy for business, but one of the key things to remember is that sustainability goes hand in hand with efficiency, and we can actually reduce our waste and reduce our costs and improve the productivity and efficiency of our teams, the longevity of our teams in practice, if we are acting in a more sustainable way both for people and the environment. The other thing to consider, which we haven't really touched on, is just the enormous potential for veterinary teams to impact sustainability through the animals in our care. So, on farm, for example, the sort of methane emissions that are so impacted by simple diet changes, the anthelmintics and parasiticides that we prescribe to pets, just considering the best use of those. Even the diets, the source of diets and the creation of pet foods, how can we inform our clients to make sustainable choices around pet food packaging and pet food production? So actually together as an industry, as professionals, we have an enormous role to play, not just in our own carbon footprint and that of our industry, but also of all of the pets and farms and equine yards out there as well.
Yeah, really interesting. Again, mid June, we're having the Veterinary Green Discussion Forum, and we're holding that very close to Royal Cannon's headquarters. Royal Cannon doing some really great work around sustainability of ingredients, also starting to look at the circular economy with the packaging, because I do think we live in this society where we produce something, we use it, and we throw it away. And actually, we have to start getting better at circulating that. And I know you've been talking to me about some of the great other B Corp businesses that are really bringing circularity into their practices as well. It's
Yeah.
a massive area, isn't it?
Yeah, one of the wonderful things about becoming a B Corp is we now have access to the Beehive. Of course, it was going to be called that, which is the network of B Corp businesses. And I recently went to an in person one. And it was just a group of businesses, again, sharing together from across industries. So there was everything from, one man band, sort of individual coaching providers, through to a company that made luxury leather goods out of disused fire hoses. And this particular company was talking about how they'd taken an area of wasteland that had basically been used and abused, so it wasn't good for anything, so it's being sold off cheaply, and they have rewilded that. They've turned that into a biodiverse area. They use it for all of their water purification. They have that sort of water filtration system. They built an enormous production barn that's insulated solely with straw bales, which they saved them over £200,000, but now barely needs any heating at all. So this
Yeah.
massive barn is sort of heated by one ground source heat pump. So it's actually saving them enormous amounts of money in their consumables. They've created a biodiverse habitat that's now full of wildlife. They've got a lovely working environment for their team members, and the other businesses in the room were going, right, let's all get together as the local B Corps and let's find an area and rewild it. And, our teams can go there and access it as a sort of shared space or whatever other use it might have. And I just found that utterly inspiring.
It's people
I just
power.
thought, what can I do around my? Can I put in like a filtration system for our wastewater? It's getting all excited. So yeah, I think actually having those examples of businesses that are thinking outside the box and actually making local impact, but then that having a snowball effect is really powerful.
Yeah, no, it's definitely people power. I'm starting to see our patch at the Liverpool Science Park. Obviously, there's a number of businesses, but we as a business decided to ask the landlords. There were some areas that weren't doing a lot. Could we actually rewild those? So I saw some field scabious coming up already. So it's lovely to see that, and for the first time ever, hearing chiff chaff in the area. So yeah, it definitely raises the spirits. I often go over just have a little look, even for a minute or two, to see what's going on. Of course, things change almost on a daily, weekly basis, don't they? And if you can see a cricket or something there as well, it gets very exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm lucky enough we've this area that we've rewilded in our garden. I see all sorts of interesting bird life out there. We were saying earlier, I get distracted when I'm in meetings. I'm like, oh, there's a woodpecker up there. And actually seeing that gives me joy. That gives me a lot of joy.
Yeah.
So kind of linking it back to well-being as well. Like if we can take these, what might seem like quite small actions, but they take effort, right? And it's about yeah, what small actions can we look around and create enough bandwidth that we can actually go and have those conversations, and then actually it can be a lot simpler than we think. I think there's a lot of people out there who are like, oh yeah, great, go for it.
Yeah. That sort of eco anxiety, the solastalgia that you're talking about, is based around despair, and despair is easy. Hope
Mm,
is difficult, but actually, I think both of us believe that we can turn the ship of the environmental crisis around, and it is that positivity, that joy that you get from nature that then makes you even more committed, but also hopeful that we have a patch of land that we're going to put a community orchard in. I mean, that's with council, and it's 2 years, and we still haven't got the lease sorted out. Again, government moving slowly, but they wouldn't let me go on to put the trees in. But I said, well, if you do nothing else, don't actually cut the grass. Now, this was a piece of green space, just grass, that I've been going past for the last 15, 20 years. And it's been cut, you know, all the time. It's very short. It's obviously a monoculture. All you see is grass. And then suddenly, because we weren't cutting it, the first time in, 15, 20 years, bee orchids appeared. So nature is resilient.
mm.
It will come back if we give it the opportunity to come back, and it will come back quite quickly. So that brings a lot of hope for me. And I think it's up to us to show that hope in the way that we live, because I think hope also creates attention and encourages other people as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah, and it's that coming back to the analogy of the ship. We might not have our hands on the tiller, but we can certainly impact the sort of ballast that's on the ship, if you like, to make it easier to turn, right? There are things that we can do to have an impact. And as you say, not to sort of dwell too much in that sort of circle of concern or despair, but actually what can we control? I mean, you're more optimistic than me.
Yeah.
If I sort of think about, together we can turn the ship, or sort of that for me is a step too far, and I just think, well, I'm not going to go there, because actually I'm not sure that's going to motivate me. What will motivate me? And what motivates me is seeing those birds in the garden. Okay, so what can I do to encourage those? And what can I do to impact the local planning? And so then it does become like a personal snowball effect, right? Then you start actually, oh, I can build on this, I can do more, and it is having an impact. So yeah, those small things, like even as we were saying, put a plant pot outside, a group of plant pots outside the practice, and you just watch the bugs come.
Liz, I'm always encouraged and made more hopeful by listening to you and the great work that you're doing, personally and professionally, with B Corp, with your diploma, etc., etc. So thank you so much also for spending time with me today discussing that. And I hope if there are any questions around the Green Awards, around B Corp, around the Veterinary Green Discussion Forum, we'll leave various links so that you can get hold of Liz, also around our awards as well. They do close the end of April. The Green Discussion Forum is mid-June. So if you're listening to it later than that, then maybe look around for next year. But Liz, it's been great speaking to you as always. It's great doing the podcast because it's an opportunity to be educated, but also in this fast life that we lead, having these meaningful conversations are so important. So thank you so much for giving me your time today.
Well, and thank you so much for your optimism and for really championing this and providing some really good practical examples of what we can all do as businesses and as individuals. And, I'd encourage anybody that is sort of feeling a bit overwhelmed by the whole climate situation to listen to Anthony and follow him, because he is so motivating and practical in the face of these, what may seem like insurmountable challenges. And so, yeah, if you need a bit of motivation and a bit of positivity to rub off, then yeah, get involved with the Green Discussion Forum and connect with Anthony for sure.
Oh, Liz, that's really kind. Thank you. Buddy is taking in the sun. He's not interested in the birds at the moment. They've all gone quiet. There's no birds out there, but I've had a great time speaking to you, and I'm looking forward to seeing you very soon.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Liz. And thank you everyone for listening. As Liz said, Liz doing amazing stuff as well, but there is things on the podcast if you want to hear from more people talking about green issues and regeneration. As I agree with you, Liz, sustainability sometimes says we should stay as we are, whereas regeneration is building for the future. So thanks for that comment as well. And thanks everyone for listening, and see you on a podcast or a webinar very soon. Hope you have a great rest of the day. Bye.